And without any further ado, I give you Rabbi Michael Schiffman.
Okay. I've been a believer in Yeshua about 38 years. I'm telling everyone 40, I just kind of round it up, because it's kind of around that period anyway. And I've got to see a lot in the Messianic movement in that time. If those of you who knew me from before, not before I was a believer, but I mean the last time I was here, I come from a traditional Jewish background. I kind of knew what being Jewish was about. I'm not going to give my testimony, don't worry. And when I became a believer in Yeshua, it was more of a continuation of a relationship I had with God since I was a child. I wasn't brought up as an agnostic or an atheist. I was brought up in a believing home. We didn't believe in Yeshua, we believed in his Father. But I came to believe in Yeshua. And I'll tell you, when I became a believer, there were probably 4 or 5 Messianic congregations in the entire country. Now they say there's something like 200 or 150 or something like that. There's like 85 to 90 in the UMJC. There were maybe 5, I'm not exaggerating. And none of them were anywhere near where I was. I was in Phoenix, Arizona. And there was like one in Baltimore. There was one in Washington area, or Silver Springs, Maryland, Bethesda, that area. There was maybe one in New York. There just weren't very many. One in Chicago and one in LA. Very few congregations. And frankly, I was lost. Not lost in relationship to who I was as a person, not lost in relationship to Yeshua, but lost in what that meant to be Jewish and a follower of Yeshua. And I was floundering. My friends, well-meaning people, took me to their church, a Baptist church. And it was very nice. The people were very nice. It was the first time I was ever in a church in my life. And it just, whatever it was, I felt like I was sitting in somebody else's living room. It's not your furniture. It's not people. And that's the way people treated me too. Oh, welcome to our fellowship. Yeah, you accepted my Messiah. Welcome to you. But it's the New York thing. That little island in the Northeast I told you about. Anyway, I didn't say that, but that's what was going on in my mind. I was the one that was Jewish. I was the one embracing my own Messiah, but I felt like the odd man out. And there were a lot of other differences. When I was in the church world, very nice, well-meaning people. They all felt, let's make them feel at home, and they came up to tell me Jewish jokes. And being the graceful person I was, I didn't tell them where to go, but I really had a good idea where I wanted them to go. But I didn't tell them that. It just made me feel less and less welcome. These were not my people. After that, being there, I was also treated, I should mention, not like a pioneer, but like a celebrity. I was the Jewish believer. I mean, I was on a pedestal. If I spoke in that group, it was like coming from Mount Sinai itself, from the mouth of God. And that was kind of cool. In fact, even when I was in seminary, I had some world-renowned professors. I had one professor, Dr. Harold O.J. Brown. I don't know if any of you have heard of him. You probably have. He was one of my professors, and he opened up for a devotional one day, and he said, "O Lord, how I delight in thy law." He says, we don't delight in the word of God like the Jewish people do. And I raised my hand and said, well, the Jewish people don't all delight in the law. And I corrected him, and he said, that's very nice, but you ruined my devotional. But after that, anytime I said anything, he said, well, if Mr. Schiffman says it, it must be so. So there was this pedestal effect. All these things made me feel not very much at home. And but the seminary one came later. But in the early part, I've just felt so uncomfortable in the church because it wasn't my home. We sung hymns, and some of them I liked, but they weren't our songs. My family was kind of freaking out at that time also because he's going to a church. And I floundered. I believed in Yeshua, but I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was. And someone handed me a book, which looking back on it today was a horrible book. But at the time, it was a great book. It was called How to Grow a Messianic Synagogue by Phil Goebel, who I met years later, who was also, well, never mind. But it was a book that talked about how to start a Messianic synagogue. And it was kind of a blend of Christian Judaism, I guess is what I would call it. He put a couple of Hebrew prayers in there. He talked about men wearing a tallis when they prayed. They talked to some traditional prayers. And it wasn't happening in my situation. I was in college. But it gave me a vision. It gave me a hope. I thought that would be so cool if I could wear a tallis in a service where we worship Jesus. Because at that time we didn't say Yeshua. That came a little later. And as I floundered a little bit, I picked up a little bit. This couple that was discipling me, probably the most godly couple I ever met. They were Mennonite background. And Gene and Elmer Hebert. And they took me, out of mercy for me, they took me to a group meeting of Hebrew Christians. That's what we called ourselves then, Hebrew Christians. And it was a once monthly meeting. And I was with other Jewish people who believed in Jesus. They believed like me, and they had a similar background to me. The older ones were even cooler because they spoke Yiddish, like I used to with my grandmother a little bit. So I felt very much at home with them. And then they said, we have a Bible study that meets twice a month on Thursdays. Would you like to come? I said, well, I'll have to check my calendar. Yeah, of course I want to come. I had managed to get rides. It was a 45-minute drive each way. And I didn't have a car. But somehow I managed every time they met to be there. And this Bible study turned into a Messianic home group. They had bagels, and of course they had lousy bagels in Phoenix, but I don't know. I haven't really rated the ones here, and I can't eat bagels anymore anyway. But there's nothing like a New York one. But the fact is they had bagels and cream cheese. We'd sat around and talk, and it became like a family, this home group. And in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about the Messianic synagogue idea. After a couple of years of that home group, we actually grew a little bit, and we managed to convince a Baptist church with a lot of Sunday school space to let us use one of their rooms. And we had like our own service. We did the Shema, we had a couple of prayers, and we had our own service. In those days, we were small. There wasn't very many of us, but it was 90% Jewish because the other people weren't that interested in us, because everyone was thinking, well, the church is where it's at. You guys are just meeting in borrowed space. The church is where it's happening. But it wasn't happening for us. So we were happy to let it happen for us just with our small group.